The PlayStation 3 got a big time upgrade in 2026. At this point, all versions of the system, each generation within the generation, are all able to be opened up and modded to be able to do all kinds of stuff with custom firmware. And the latest discovery that's now been released, I went ahead, did the modification to see how exactly it would go, and if it was something that's at least kind of approachable for most people who maybe have the PlayStation 3 Super Slim. And that's what we're going to look at here today. And then at the end, I'll go ahead and take a look at what a custom firmware PS3 with the Super Slim can look like when you have some time with it. So if you guys enjoy the video, hit the like button and subscribe if you're new. This is the GitHub for what's called bad WDSD. And this is a method for loading custom firmware, or as they call it, quasi custom firmware QCFW on the PlayStation 3 Super Slim and some of the later 3000 revisions of just the PlayStation 3 Slim. And in order to do this, you use what has become the MVP in the modding scene over the last couple of years, the Raspberry Pi Pico. I use kind of the smaller half board, the 2040, and I had no issues at all with it. Now, the supported models they have here, the 2500, the 3000, but the one that people are really curious about is the Super Slim or the 4000 series with NOR flash. What that means is it won't work with the eMMC models. So at one point, Sony released the Super Slim, and it had, I think, 12 gigabytes of onboard storage, and that was sold at Walmart's, I remember it. It was $130. It worked to get the system very, very cheap, but you weren't able to do a lot when you had to start installing really anything. So what you want to look for with the Super Slim are models that have 250 gigabyte or 500 gigabyte hard drives installed. Those typically will work fine because they are NOR flash. All right, so keep that in mind if you decide to go out and look for a Super Slim. And QCFW ended up being a pretty easy process on the software side. So you will need a Super Slim with Hen installed. That's easy enough to do. It's using a USB stick and a web browser. The reason you need Hen is because you need to be able to load Stage X and get the whole process started for QCFW. So after you have Hen installed on your PS3, you then move some files over to that USB stick, and then you load up Stage X. You also need to program that Raspberry Pi Pico. Very easy if you have not done that before. You plug it into your PC, you drag and drop a couple megabytes worth of a file. It'll flash for about 10 seconds. The blue light will then go solid. You unplug it, and that's it. So from here, we can start breaking down the PlayStation 3 Super Slim. And my thoughts on the Super Slim, it's not my favorite one. In fact, I'd say it's my least favorite out of all of them. Maybe the design, the look of it, the sliding door for the Blu-ray drive, it feels cheap, and that was kind of the idea by Sony, was to make a cheap PlayStation 3 system. And fortunately, it really hasn't gone up in price much. I picked this one in particular up on eBay, and it was right around $100. I've seen some go as low as $75 to $80. It does depend on what comes with it, controllers, extra games, and if it works. This one fortunately does work and just has some dust that I need to clear out after I break it down. It started at $600 with the generation, the 60 gigabyte, and as I mentioned, with the 12 gigabyte eMMC flash, it got down to just over $100. Much different than it is now, where everything goes up by at least $100 from when they launched. Still, though, it is a system that is sought after because internally it has the most efficient pairing of the cell and the RSX. In fact, after I break it down, you can see that here. Yeah, it's much smaller than what we were dealing with. And if you look at so this is the chart that has the layout for everything about these PlayStation 3 systems through the generations, and they compare them by model numbers here. So starting with the A01, that'd be the 60 gigabyte model that was fully backwards compatible. The Cell, and then the RSX, 90 nanometers. Yeah, not very efficient, and we know there's all kinds of stories of these things yellow lighting or having some issue when it comes to the ball grid array on those chips. It ate a lot of power, and it expelled a lot of heat. But if we scroll all the way down to the 4000 series here, I mean, just right off the bat, 45 nanometer cell, 40 nanometer RSX, or a 28 nanometer. There's a bit of a silicone lottery going on here with the RSX, but if you end up getting a 28 nanometer RSX paired with that cell at 45 nanometers, you're in good shape for a system that is just not pulling much power compared to that initial run, that the first A01 starting point. So this is a reason that people have been curious about the Super Slim, if it could ever get to the point where you can load custom firmware versus running Hen. Hen is somewhat limited versus custom firmware when it comes to things like overclocking, loading Linux, or even running full ISO, say, for the PlayStation 2. But with that said, once you get down to the board level for the PlayStation 3 Super Slim and you have a chance to check out the RSX that doesn't even have a heat spreader on it, you have to start looking around for where you're going to put down and solder 6 different wires. These wires then have to be run to that Raspberry Pi, which I hid towards the front, and we'll check that out here in a minute. But the idea here is the Raspberry Pi will detect on startup really a way to exploit the boot up that allows it to inject a payload that initiates custom firmware. And because it has to do all this during startup, you have to attach it to the board. It kind of reminds me a bit of the reset glitch hack for the Xbox 360. Just more wires is involved for the most part. So like we can see here, 4 of the pads are relatively easy to solder to. I mean, this would be beginner level soldering, I would even say. They're mostly out of the way here, you can see, and 2 of the 4 for me already had solder on them, but the other 2 were just blank pads that I added solder to, and you just want to mark them. So sometimes what I'll use are Post-it notes if I only have the same color wire, which I did here. And after I run them around, I usually leave a pretty good amount of slack on the wire and then cut them after I get everything together and make sure it can reach and make it as short as possible. I'll use some Post-it notes, write down, say, SCTX, and attach it to the other side so that I remember where everything is going. These 4, I think no problem. The problematic ones would be these guys right here, CMD and CLK. Those are very small components. Fortunately, all this is on the back side of the board, so it's not like you're going, okay, top side, then the underside of the board, and just kind of run them around to hopefully get them all together at the end. But this is pretty. This would be your cell kind of at the top here. That's your cell, the other side. And then this is how small these guys are. So I had to break out the magnifying glass for it. Fortunately, there's nothing really on this side to get in the way. So you lay some wire here, do your best to solder it, and as long as there is a pretty good connection, you should be okay. What I ended up doing, as you can see, I routed the wires around using Kapton tape to hold them down specifically at different curves or points where I was trying to keep it as flat as possible. And then I ran the cables out the front. I also cut some of the metal caging here to make sure that there weren't any issues when it closes up and maybe the cables get pinched or even cut in some way. And then after it was all back in the case, I managed to hide the Raspberry Pi underneath of the disk drive area and out of the way of the mechanism that slides that tray door open and closed. It was a pretty good spot for it. With that all installed, you do still have to load up QCFW. This is once again where Hen comes into play, as when I go in, there's a little toggle here that says install or push CFW. And when I do, it looks like it's frozen. And that's part of the process. You just let it sit for like 7-8 minutes, after which it will restart, and if everything goes well, it should load into EvilNet. That's our custom firmware, and that means we're good to go at this point. So now, whenever you power cycle, you won't have to remember, oh, I have to load up Hen and get that started. No, you press the power button, it'll then double beep, and I'd say 10 seconds or so later, it will then turn on the screen and you'll have EvilNet and you'll boot right into your cross media bar with all the custom firmware bells and whistles. I'd say success rate is very, very good. I'm not even kidding when I think it might be above 90%. And I say that because I did see one part where it failed to boot up correctly, but what it did was it just went ahead and restarted again without you even knowing. So really the boot process ended up just being longer, so it eventually was able to work itself out. And while I'm not necessarily making this video to explain what you can do with a custom firmware system, I technically have one here, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time putting some games on it and kind of show you what a somewhat finished product would look like if you wanted to get your own PlayStation 3 that's been modded. You know, I'm going to go ahead and do just a cold boot up so you see how long it takes exactly. So power button's on. I also have the DualShock 3 here, just got the double beep, and we should see it pop up. Oh, this is also gonna be down to when AverMedia decides to pick up the connection for the PlayStation 3. So in order to get video from the system, because there we go, EvilNet, because it does have HDCP protection, you want to use a splitter. And there are certain kinds, and it's unfortunate because I would want to tell you which splitter to get, but sometimes I'll recommend a splitter and then someone will get it and it doesn't work for whatever reason. It really is kind of a lottery with that as well. But they're all over Amazon and people tend to look into what the more updated ones are. But if you have the right splitter, you can strip HDCP protection for the PS3 and you can do video capture like this. So this is the custom firmware PlayStation 3 Super Slim here, and we can go through and look at some of the different features. So if we go into like firmware tools here, you can overclock things if you want, which is a big thing, obviously, for the Super Slim now, as opposed to well, Webman would help you, but with Hen, it still kind of had a bit of a hard time getting overclocking right at all. You also have other OS tools, so you can indeed load Linux if you want on here. But the thing that a lot of people are going to be curious about comes down to ripping PlayStation 3 games, PS2 games, PS1, PSP, really having a nice big library of different games. So for ripping games, I tend to use Irisman. It's very easy. You pop a game in, you press triangle on the disk logo when you load it up, and then you just tell it to copy or create ISO, and then it just kind of goes, and that's it. It sets it up perfectly fine for you in there. But when I want to play a game, I tend to go with Mana Guns because I think it has the best presentation. So we'll jump in here for it, and you can just see the games that I have. This Super Slim has a 1 terabyte drive in it, and I was kind of curious. Okay, how many games can I load on a 1 terabyte system? And I was taking a bunch of these games that I have back here. I have many PS3 titles. I was just ripping them to the hard drive constantly. And I ended up with quite a few. For PS2 games, I did move some over because the ripping process for PS2 games on the PS3 is painfully slow. It's easier to rip them with a disk drive, even externally, on your PC, and then move them over in ISO form. So this is the setup that I have right now. It's CoverFlow 3D with Mana Guns, and I just think the presentation is very nice. You don't have to go this route because you can make it as basic as you want, to where you can come in here and go to, here's flow. You can just do, I think, list, and what that'll do is it'll take all of them and put them just in a straight up list for you if you want to go this route, so you can quickly and easily find what you want and then just boot into it. I like the look, we'll say, of flow. I just think it looks really pleasing here like this, like a shelf of games, and has a nice 3D effect. But essentially, after you rip a bunch of games, you can just go through them and it'll launch directly from here back to the cross media bar, and then the game will fire up. Now, I think I have 42 or 43 games on here right now with that that 1 terabyte hard drive. It's not an SSD, it's just standard hard drive. And I think I still have a little over 300 gigabytes free. So I would probably move over more PS2 games, more PSP games, and then I would probably just go through and rip PlayStation 3 games. You can move over ISO files for PS3 as well. I know that's going to be a question. You can. I tend to recommend FTPing those over, though, because the USB ports on the PS3 incredibly slow, and moving it over through FTP from your PC, where maybe you're downloading the games right to the system, works very well. Yes, it's also a little slower, but I'd say it's faster than USB, and it's also more convenient. You don't have to get a USB stick involved. You don't have to maybe split the ISOs up maybe for a FAT32. It's just, to me, it's much easier drag and drop. Anyway, when you do want to launch a game, I'll show you here. We hit cross to mount the game. It'll take a moment, go into this black screen as it sets everything up internally, and then it'll kick you back to the cross media bar here. At which time I go up and there's Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2. I'll fire that up, and it'll just start the game normally. I've also had people mention to me that you won't get banned if you have your account signed in on a custom firmware PlayStation 3 and just play games and earn trophies normally. I'm not going to recommend people use their official account on a custom firmware PS3, but I do understand that there are many people who have never been banned on a custom firmware system, and I think it really comes down to how you approach it. If I install a trainer or a cheat device that is a one button unlock every trophy, all 40 something trophies in a second, that seems pretty obvious that you're cheating or you have mod support or something. And yeah, that's like a no-brainer for Sony to go, oh, this is easy, we'll just ban them. Or if you're online ruining an experience for the people because you have a auto aim or crazy stuff happening in Call of Duty, yeah, they're probably going to ban you for that as well. All right. So, understand it really comes down to how you present yourself in these scenarios with your custom firmware system. That said, if you're just using ISOs and playing games normally, sure, the likelihood of getting banned apparently is very low, but I'm not going to recommend you use your official account that you might have years and years of purchases and trophy data tied to. I mentioned before it's not a generation that really bragged about its frame rates, but man, it was a generation for fun. Absolutely was. So there's still a lot of games from this time period that you can just go back and have a blast with. Ultimate Alliance 2 was awesome. And unfortunately, many of these games are just not available anymore, and a lot of it has to do with licensing issues. But it was a very creative time. It was a longer generation, too, that also had shorter development cycles. So the library of games for the PS3, the Xbox 360, right in there, it's incredible. So there's a lot to explore at this time. Also, we weren't quite out of the couch co-op time. So if you can source some dual shocks or 6-axis controllers, there's a lot of stuff you can do, even up to 7 people on one PlayStation 3. Yeah, I did a whole video about that before, just talking about the 6-axis, and people were interested on social media. You can indeed sync up a bunch of PlayStation 3 controllers for things like wrestling games or FIFA or others, and just go crazy with couch co-op. Anyway, when you're all done, you can just quit out like normal, and it'll just kick you back to the cross media bar. You can also install package files, and that'll populate directly on that game cross media bar portion. So that way you don't have to necessarily go into an application. Like I have Dante's Inferno as one example here. There's Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories. There's Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix I also put there. Modern Warfare 2, Prince of Persia Sands of Time. So you can have games in many different places here. You can also go through Webman Games and have them all listed right away on the cross media bar. Again, I just like the setup that Mana Guns has. So yeah, the custom firmware PlayStation 3 right now in 2026 is awesome. And I'm really happy that there is at least an option for people who have what was for the longest time unavailable for custom firmware with that PlayStation 3 Super Slim. But as I mentioned before, the fabrication of the cell and the RSX is very favorable, we assume, towards overclocking. And while the RSX is the main target right now for that, the cell processor has recently seen a breakthrough to where that's being overclocked, and some are getting to the point where they're questioning, should we work to lift the 30 FPS cap on some of these games? Because when you raise the cell processor's frequency, that seems to have a major effect, along with the RSX, to having some of these games not run terribly in terms of frame rate, to where maybe 60 frames is at least on the table, depending on how far these things can be pushed, because there will also be power draw limitations that would have to be sorted out. But that's one of the reasons I was really curious about the Super Slim when it comes to custom firmware, because the overclocking portion is all of a sudden seeing a big spike in interest and honestly progress. So really cool stuff here for the PlayStation 3. I may do a video. Let me know if you're curious when it comes to custom firmware on PS3 for easier models, one you don't have to open up, and kind of identify which ones you should be looking for online that would give you the best efficiency, we'll say, or even I would say the ultimate model to get outright and load custom firmware on, to where you don't have to open the system up. You just need a flash drive. Let me know if that's something you're interested, though, down in the comments. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.